hear me, Wes?
I can.
Yes, it works. Technology. Amazing.
We did it. We made the switch from Zoom to Clubhouse.
Wow, look at us doing big things. I don't know if it's like this in your family, Wes, but like my extended family will still call me because they think I know how to use technology. They're like, oh, he does animation. Like, he clearly knows it all. And I know nothing. Like, the secret of Dash is really in Corey's technical expertise because if
That's
like
why
my
he's always doing the Red Hat videos.
oh yeah, for sure. They don't want me animating that stuff anymore. They definitely want Corey's sweet keyframes on it. Corey is like here's the best thing about Corey that people don't know. You see his amazing work. You know he's a nice guy, but he is like a literal technical savant. Like Corey has solved so many just random problems, technical problems. Like it's blowing my mind. Like even from setting up like our server and like he was troubleshooting stuff. He's like, oh, I did the rerouting thing in the bobber, so now anyone can access it. I'm like, yeah, I would have done the same thing. It's such a trip. He is like the go-to for any questions people have.
So he's the undercover IT
Oh yeah. Oh
department.
yeah. Definitely, most definitely. What about with you guys?
That's Chad
Dad?
on our
Okay.
team. He's like automating all these processes, and yeah, it's pretty amazing.
That's so funny. That's so funny. All right, we'll let a few more people trickle in here. I'm gonna go on Twitter and promote this, so maybe some people can join. But yeah, it's been really fun, Wes. It tends to be a mixture of like I would say 10 to 20 people that kind of join us regularly. I see some friendly faces in the crowd. I'm glad to have some folks join us again. Learn about sound design. We can finally, as motion designers, learn a little bit more on how we should be explaining your job to our clients. So it doesn't come to you and people are like, what the hell is this? How do I describe music that I like?
Sell us good.
Sell us good. All right, let's
Or at least
see.
don't end up in the situation. We had this like last week. It was like, hey, we're wondering if you have time for a last minute rush job. The client, for whatever reason, thought we were just gonna do all this sound stuff. Like,
Yeah, right. It's like,
bummer.
well, what's so hard for y'all is that you are literally the bottom of the funnel. It's like all these people, the idea people, then the execution people. Here's the animation. Then it's like music lasts a little bit.
Yep, squeeze it in,
Whatever.
ship
Squeeze
it.
it in. Squeeze it in.
It's
Ship it.
kind of the nice thing though too, because it's like you all like slog through this project, every
Mhm.
day for
Mhm.
weeks, and then we get to just kind of come in at the end and like finish it.
Yeah, that's true. You don't know the layers, the layer cake we've been dealing with on the way up to it. And then it's like, oh, this looks nice, guys. You're like, Wes, this is round 12, my friend. Just help me get this project out the door. Exactly. All right, well, I think we'll let some folks come in, but we can go ahead and get started. So welcome to another Mograph lunch. I'm not even sure what episode this is now. We've done a handful, which is great that people keep coming back. But my name is Matt Garrison. I'm one of the co-founders and executive producers at Dash, and I'm joined by Wesley Slover running Sono Sanctus. I don't even know how to describe you guys. Music, sound design, all the above. Like, how do you describe Sono Sanctus to audiences?
Yeah, so I describe us as a sound and music design studio.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so in post audio and with music, there tends to be different types of companies. So there's like music houses that have big libraries, huge roster of composers,
Hmm.
but those companies don't necessarily do sound design or mixing. And then you have kind of these more traditional like post audio
Hmm.
houses, which are usually like a nice studio. Um, Oftentimes the agency like comes to the studio, is sitting there. It's like you just book like a day or two at the end of a
Hmm.
project, you finish it there. um, what we do is we kind of try to do a mix of different things where we want to do sound design and we want to do music, and we really care a lot about the interplay between those. And
Hmm.
um, it makes it so that we can be more collaborative through the whole process, because a lot of times
Hmm.
a client will come to us and have a project and we say, okay, how do we use we are also a design studio in the same way that
Right.
a motion studio is a design studio
Hmm.
that uses
Hmm.
motion, typography,
Hmm.
these types of things. Our tools are sound design, music, and the
Hmm.
mix.
Hmm.
So we basically try to just bring those to the table and figure out the best solution, for our client's project.
Oh well, I love that. And I know this is always a topic of conversation in this industry. You know, are you a generalist? Are you specialist? You know, what defines you? I always love the term motion design because I feel like it really just encompasses a bunch of different things. And to your point, Wes, like, you know, we really are just using a variety of toolkits to basically try to take as much control of that project as we can to make it look really good, you know? And so I think that variety, and like, it's always tough though, because it's like, so here's a great example. You know, I can tell clients, I can be like, oh yeah, Dash, you know, we make videos that matter, you know, and people are like, okay, cool, they do videos, and that's like really easy. But like, that is also still kind of limiting, because I want to be like, well, we do motion design because, you know, we experiment, we try different things. Sure, we don't do a bunch of interactive, but maybe we could try with that. We'd be open to it. And so it's like, you want to be specific enough that like your client understands what the hell you do, so they keep hiring you, but then you don't want to like, you know, pigeonhole yourself. You know, you want to kind of keep it broad. But I thought the way you described it, in sort of that sort of analogy of like kind of a similar way that we would do it with motion design, where you have all these toolkits to make it up and works in tandem, is really cool.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I think that subconsciously because early in my career I started working with motion studios. I think I was really inspired by the way that you all work, especially with, you know, I've been doing this for like 10 years now. And like 10 years ago, it's like, what even is motion design? You know, and it's so broad. It can mean like, you know, Pixar, or it can mean, you know, typography. Like it's a lot of different things.
I still remember when you and I first met. You know, it's just crazy now, because I think that was probably like 5 or 6 years ago. I don't even know if we had even started Dash when we first met, but I believe it was through Roger Lima, and we were hanging out at Style Frames. And he, you know, Roger was always the guy who like knew everybody, so he was like hopping around saying hey to all these different people, and we were just all out. And like, I just remember it was like Roger's kind of crew of people coming together. I think it was like maybe us, and then you, and then like maybe Brendan Hogan, I think. Brendan Hogan? Yeah. Brendan. Yeah. I still follow him on Twitter. Looks like he's doing well too.
Or Brendan Williams.
Williams, that's what it is. That's what it is. Yeah.
I have another friend who's named Brendan Hogan, who's a sound designer. Anyway.
That's really funny. But yeah, you know, it's just funny like how this stuff kind of starts and builds. Like, I know right at that point in time, we were kind of just having conversations about what Dash was doing, and I think you had only been into it and starting Sono Sanctus for what, maybe like a year at that point. What year did you actually start Sono Sanctus?
2012. Yeah. So
okay.
this Style Frames was like the first conference I ever went to. It was right when I was just starting out. So
cool. Nice.
We kind of grew up together, Mac.
I know. Look at us getting old. I do feel like that sometimes with the folks in the industry, and just how talented they are and how young they are. I never really thought of my 30s as like feeling old, but then I'm kind of like looking at all these like kids, and I'm like, dang, like what the hell happened? When you look back and you were first starting Sono Sanctus, you know, what was like, I'm always curious when people decide to start a studio, like why start something that's kind of a bigger name? Why not just be like a freelancer at Wesley Slover? Like, what was the impetus you feel like for really wanting to have a brand name, a studio name?
Yeah, I mean, so really it was like, I really started out as a freelancer. But I thought it would be useful to think of myself more as a studio. And I think even a lot of the other, like Cypher Audio and Echo Lab, you know, a lot of those were really just like one person. And so that kind of also just sort of informed how I thought about it. But I think it was helpful because I knew that occasionally, you know, somebody would ask me to do like folky music, and I don't really do like the acoustic guitar thing, but you know, I have a friend that I work with a lot who's really good at that. And so I want it to be easier to bring people into the project, and it really wasn't a way to like try to present myself as looking like, oh, I'm a big company, even though I'm like working in like a little plywood box by myself on a laptop. It just made it a little bit easier to sort of say, yeah, I do have like a network of resources that I work with. And then it's made it easier to grow to now where we actually have like, you know, people on payroll and, and stuff.
Oh yeah. That's so crazy. You know, it's like, do you feel like, all right, here's an interesting question. Do you feel like, you know, when you pivoted to, or maybe the first question is, were you operating under Wesley Slover as a freelancer first and then actually?
No.
Like, cool? Okay.
I started an LLC.
Okay. So a question I was curious about would be like, if you notice a difference in like incoming work going from like, I'm a freelancer to now like, here's my brand name, if people just almost like bought into like the studio, they can handle more work. But it sounds like that was sort of always from the foundational piece that kind of built on it.
Yeah. And I mean, I wasn't doing the kind of work I do now professionally. So it
Mm-hmm.
was really like I kind of needed to, make the jump, and so I kind of started all at once,
Mm,
if that makes sense.
it does.
So it would be really hard to sort of compare apples to oranges, or apples to apples. I don't know you know.
Well, it's interesting, like, because I know when Corey and I first started Dash, we were kind of just two freelancers, but we always presented ourselves as kind of being bigger, And what's the irony is now is when we were younger, it was like we kept thinking that every client wants to work with a big studio, like you gotta be a big name. And so we're bigger than just two of us. Like, we'll talk to our team and get back to you. And it was just like Corey and I getting off the call and then continuing to talk. But like now looking back on it, it's so funny because what we find with a lot of our clients is they love that it's a small kind of shop that you're able to work with. Like, I imagine it's the same way with your clients where they appreciate being able to call and say like, hey, cool, I'm going to talk to Wes who runs the company. He's work on this project for me. Like, it's not getting handed off to, a team of project managers that are kind of doing a bunch of in-betweens. It's like, hey, no, it's you and your small team. And it kind of feels the same way with Dash and I. Do you feel like that's been like a big advantage for y'all as y'all kind of been growing over the years?
Yeah, I think that we really like the spot we are now, where I should say like our team right now is I'm full time. We have a full time sound designer, a part time producer, and a part time sound designer, mix
Mm,
engineer, and then a handful of people that we work with pretty regularly who come in, as we need a little extra help.
sure.
Um, and I think we're in this great spot right now where it's very personal, um, and we don't have a ton of the project management is simple enough that we're like a relatively small team and we work
Mm,
together all the time. Um, but we have the resources to
mm-hmm.
accomplish big stuff. It's like we still will work on projects with like the mill, for instance, which is
Yeah, right.
gigantic, and we have enough resources to still like meet those needs.
Do you feel like what are some of the big differences? Not put you on the spot, but like what are some of the big differences you feel like in working with a group like the Mill versus working with like us? When we have a project that comes
Oh
in, is
man,
it?
you got to make it personal, huh?
No, no, just mean like I have to imagine that there is just like a different need when you're working with an organization that big as it is working with someone kind of smaller, right? Like the demand
Yeah,
done.
I'd say like for us, the big thing is going into a project, understanding what the expectations are. Like
Mm-hmm.
when a big agency reaches out to us, like oh yeah, like an example is like Droga 5 reached out to us about
Mm-hmm.
doing some work, and I wrote them back an email and was just very candid of like, here's who we are, here's how we work, here's what we can do for you, because we really don't want to end up in a situation where someone sees us and they go, oh well, this studio seems to work with like reputable clients or whatnot, so surely they have the like $400 an hour recording studio in New York,
Right.
and we can like come and bring the agency in, and they have like a roster of composers who can like whip up infinite options for us. um
Mm-hmm. Oh God, I just stressed.
so
I'm sweating now just listening to
yeah. Well,
that.
because I mean that is like a way that some big agencies do work that way on projects, because it there's a benefit to that. If you can
Yeah.
throw enough money at it, like it's kind of great because your client can just be super demanding, and if we just create enough work, like
Yeah.
we'll make them
Right.
happy. That's the way to work. But for us, like it's just not, we don't want to work that way.
Yeah.
And we don't want to end up in a situation where somebody thinks that's what to expect from
Yeah.
us.
That's the norm.
um,
100%.
I don't know. I kind of got drifted away from your question. Oh, so what it is it's really I think I do really like working with like mid-sized studios a lot, because I think that we're kind of on the same, we're trying to do the same kind of thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I feel like really like Dash is a great example of like we fit together really well because we're kind of working on that same like scope and scale.
100%.
But I also like, with the mill, for example, it's like it's a huge organization, but we have like our kind of smaller team of people that we work with at the mill Chicago, and
Hmm.
I loved that too.
Nice.
Um, and so yeah,
It
I
kind of
think as
feels
long as people
small. Like so, it's
understand,
like
yeah,
almost
exactly,
it almost feels like you're working with like a studio within a bigger group in a
yeah.
way. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
could also imagine that some projects of, if they came to us with certain projects, it'd be like, oh, okay, we're gonna have a hard time, like, you know, fulfill, getting you what you want, like,
The
if that makes sense.
Yeah, the example you gave about having someone want to come in and like sit in with you and like do the edits and stuff together, it like brought me flashbacks to like a handful of clients that asked us the same thing. They were like, "Yeah, so like could our team like come in and we have a couple people there while y'all are animating?" And I was like, "No, like absolutely not. Like my staff would leave. Whether or not that I would even be okay with it, like my staff would leave. You know, half our office is introverts, and I just can't even imagine a client sitting over their shoulder while they're animating. Like they would not stay for long. So I think you did a great thing, and it's kind of a reminder, I think, for myself and for other folks out there that, you know, you don't have to tailor your approach to the group that you're working with. You have an approach. People are coming to you because you do great work, and that's done because of your approach. And so reminding people that that's how you operate, you know, and that you don't necessarily need to conform into another direction. Like you want to be amiable and try to help where you can, right? But you know, not at the expense of what is creating your work and making it look really good. And so I don't know, you said it kind of nonchalantly, but I think that's a really important thing, because when you get that big client project that comes in, there's this feeling that you're like, oh my gosh, this is like a huge deal, right? Like I don't want to blow this. I want to do everything I can to make this go smoothly. And so then you start to think about ways to make it easier on them, you know, with what you're doing. But then at what sacrifice? Like, are you sacrificing some key elements of your process that you might not normally do? Or are you trying to do stuff too quickly? All that stuff kind of comes into play.
Yeah, and I think like, especially more recently, I feel like being very transparent and everybody communicating clearly their expectations is like one of the most important things to me at this point in my career. Like I mean, it's something about our industry that is really frustrating is that the goalposts are constantly moving,
Yeah.
you
Oh
know,
yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel not as much with you guys. I think maybe you guys are kind of similar too, with like you like to like set very specific, like,
Yeah. Like
you
here
know,
are the goal,
rules.
and
This is what we're
once we
doing.
achieve it, we're done.
This
You know.
this is our schedule. Like if there's big changes required, like it's going to change the schedule, you know, just
Yeah.
all those kind of things, so that everybody feels like supported. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, like I'm just always so worried about some client expecting us to like do something that we just like don't have time to do, or whatever, or just I guess more it's more like I hate feeling like I have to argue with somebody, or like that there's
Yeah.
confrontation, you know,
Yeah.
like I don't want there to be confrontation about something like that. That's really what it is. I hate
Oh,
confrontation.
oh, I know. I know. I feel the
I don't
same
want to
way.
do the project well.
I'm so soft. I just like be happy, love it, you know. But like as a producer, I gotta be like, no, you guys gotta pay more money for this.
Yeah.
But I think what the tough part is with something like that, it's like you set these goalposts, you have these dates, right? And I think there's a misconception that it's like one big thing that really requires like this uplift, right? All right, now is the time that there's this huge uplift that happens. When in reality, it's like what ends up it being is like on a project, there's a bunch of little things that just start to add up. You're like, can we just do a little bit extra here? And you're like, all right, yeah, I can do y'all solid, trying to be flexible, you know. And then like the next level, like,
I
what
can
about
think of a
this?
project we worked on recently that I think falls
That
into
same
that
vibe.
category.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. We'll get in trouble talking about client projects on here, so maybe
Oh yeah.
we should keep moving. But yes. So all right. So here's one for you. I was talking about this to the Ivy guys as well as Odd Fellows. You know, about sort of goals. You know, when you start a company or kind of where you're heading. I think back to the early days of Dash, and you know, we really didn't have a ton of major goals initially. We kind of started to develop them as we moved forward. But I don't know. When you started Sona Sanctus, did you ever think about, you know, kind of like where you are today? Was this kind of where you wanted to be? Were you ever thinking about that much more than just like creating stuff?
Yeah, I mean, at first, like I started like 3 months before my first child was born.
Mhm.
So very
Wow.
much the goal was just like pay the bills and survive. um, but yeah, I think for me the dream was really just like to be able to hire some help.
Mm-hmm.
And um, I feel like we've really accomplished exactly that, where it's like I have Jake as our producer, who's like
Mm-hmm.
taking care of our contracts, making sure our invoices are getting paid, you know, helping out with other stuff. That is the kind of thing that just sort of like just the stuff that just you know, drags you down when you've
Oh
got
yeah.
to deal with client stuff, and then you also have to keep your business running. um
Yeah.
so like that was huge. And then having having Trevor, who works with me full time as a sound designer, and like getting to collaborate a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I feel like really is like was the dream for me. Um,
That's
and
great.
kind of like still, and even still, it's like at this point, I feel like we definitely have potential. I think we could grow more and whatnot. But honestly, we kind of made a decision that this is about as big as we want to get.
Hmm.
Um, and sort of the next thing, or I mean, this has really been the goal for a long time, is really just to focus on like working with the people that we feel respected by, that we like, that we enjoy working with, um, and do projects that are like maybe bigger scope or higher profile, but
Sure.
not necessarily like taking on more projects and more clients and stuff.
That's a really wow. That's a great answer, Wes. I feel like you should be like my business development coach. Like, don't
No,
grow.
I'm already
Just grow.
tired. I'm exhausted from doing my own.
Well, what's really interesting is like, all right, so breaking down that goal, you want to bring on more people to kind of alleviate some of the work that you have to do. And I completely agree that I found the same thing happened to us as we started to grow. All of a sudden, Corey and I aren't getting as stretched thin. We bring in a few folks to help us in different areas and things start to run smoothly. But then along with it, to what you alluded to, is you slowly start to bring in more work. You start to get more more notoriety. People are like, cool, we want to give you more work. And there's this constant pressure to like keep growing to be able to handle that work. And what I was kind of surprised about is I kept thinking, well, with every person we're hiring, it's making my job easier, but it also introduces a whole new like litany of stuff that you hadn't dealt with before. Well, then you start to have a bigger staff. So like, just making sure that you're staying organized with their goals and what they're moving for, or just staying more organized with the different projects that are coming in. Then you have to be more conscious about price point as well, which always sucks sometimes when like there's a really cool project that you maybe could have taken on a few years back when you were a smaller studio, but then now it's like, man, we're at 11 people at Dash. It's like I can't take this on. We got to have something with a little bit more money. And so like I do wonder if like, what is sort of the goal as far as like a prime size to be? I think it fluctuates, but I think it's great that y'all been able to identify that like kind of where you are right now, honing in on some particular clientele that you work with and taking on this project. I think is a really great plan.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think for like a sound and music company too, it's like every project we do is very small in comparison.
Mm-hmm.
And so like our team is really, it's like four of us plus, a small handful of contractors that we're regularly in touch with. But like that is actually like fairly large in terms of like how much work that we end up doing.
Mm-hmm.
So like the thought of like having enough work to support like another person, it's like that's a lot of bids and
Yeah.
meetings and a lot of admin, and it would really probably have me doing less design work, uh, just to be able to like pay for that for somebody like that.
Sure. And like keeping up with that, right? And it's like you got to balance that with like what do you enjoy spending most of your time on? It's like creating that stuff. So you don't want to pull yourself too far away from that.
Yeah, and I think there's also I guess kind of going back to your point that there's some flexibility that we have at the size that we are,
Mm-hmm.
where yeah I can find more time for side projects, I think, because I'm not going to be having to keep as many projects coming in through the door. I don't know.
No, that's
It's
fair.
hard. I feel like it kind of really depends on, like, you can structure a company
Mm-hmm.
those different ways. It's just I feel like where we are, I feel very happy. So I
That's
don't want
great.
to like just feel the pressure to like to try to get bigger.
Well, and I also think that's too that, and maybe it just comes as you get a little bit older too, on like where your priorities are. And I think like for me, I think one of the things I've recognized is the value of time. I think when you're younger, it's like you got all the time in the world. You can work on work, you stay up late, go do stuff afterwards, and then you kind of get into your career a little bit, and you're like start to look. I'm at an age right now where both my parents are getting older. They're retired now. And so even just like having the ability to go hang out with them more or not feel as pressed to work on the weekends, I used to like be a weekend slave, which I hate to say because I would just work all the time on the weekends. But I've really tried to push that. I mean, at this point in time, I think it's pretty rare that we ever ask any of our staff to work on the weekends. If we're coming up on something like that, it's hiring out freelancers to making sure that everyone has that most valuable commodity, which is time.
Yeah, I mean that's huge. Like I want to go play board games after work and not be exhausted from managing the details. Or yeah, it's like the more projects we take on, that's the more potential fires that I'm going to be on the phone with such and such
Yeah.
agency, like making sure we solve it, you know.
You gotta make your time for Dungeons and Dragons, which I still need to
That's
come
right.
play with you at some point. You can teach me how to play, and you can be my dungeon master. All right, here's a good one for you, Wes. It's funny looking back because there are certain projects that have led to other projects or brought in new work. Do you find that there was like one piece that you worked on that has just brought you more work than any other pieces, where people would just perpetually reference you as like, "Oh man, I heard your sound on this. It sounded great. We want to work with you."
Yeah, so I don't think we really have projects like that.
Hmm.
I think because like for design, the visual design is like dictating what the sound design is going to be. And
Mm.
so I think a lot of times what happens is our clients, somebody goes to them because of a thing that they do, and then they hire us because we work together
Mm.
regularly.
Interesting.
I also think people are thinking less about sound, and the sound is so dictated that even if someone has a reference of, oh, this sound is really great, like if that's not what the animation is, then like you can't do it. You know,
Right.
like
Right.
that'll happen sometimes where someone be like, oh, this is this really great sound design, we like this a lot, can you do something like this? And I'm looking at the animation, I'm like, well, it wouldn't fit, you know,
It
like
wouldn't match.
it's not the same thing. But we do
Interesting.
have, we have a pretty decent sized music library, and we definitely have like tracks that are sort of, I call them like our money tracks that
Oh, nice. That
you
everyone
know.
kind of defaults towards. That's
Yeah.
great.
So we definitely have like kind of a handful of like styles and things that I feel like we are recurring for sure.
It's interesting. It's like I almost feel like with what y'all are doing, you brought up a good point that like people have kind of connected with you as a result of some of your partnerships and who you've been working with. It's almost like I bet someone came to you who's kind of a partner of yours now, and like their exposure of that company or whoever it was, because of how much clout that they had or the projects that they were working on, probably started to funnel some of that work towards you. So just like projects might be the case for us where a visual draws in the right client, you do one project with the right studio or the right group, and then other people are like, well, who did that? And they kind of like start to recognize that you're working with some bigger brands, which has to be really helpful too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that the way that we get our word out about us is really more about the motion studios and the agencies like promoting
Mm-hmm.
themselves, you know.
Nice. Yeah. Every
And
time we
honestly,
share
I
our work,
think
you're like, look at that, we did that.
honestly, I think a lot of times the stuff that people what makes somebody more impressed by us, like on social media or whatever, is actually the quality of the animation, not the sound of music. Well, because like think like
That's
audio on
funny.
Instagram is terrible.
Oh, it's awful. Yeah.
It's awful. It's mono. It's like incredibly compressed. I don't even have the sound on when I'm on
No,
Instagram.
no,
You know.
yeah, I don't either. It's so bad.
Um,
So
so
bad.
I think that, yeah, I think it really is like, I don't know, humans, we're very like visual creatures, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Um, I think back, we were talking about how we've gotten a bit older, sort of looking at time as more valuable and the things that we're doing to try to kind of give ourselves more of that. You're talking about maybe not growing your studio to a point size where it's massive and it's just churning, but kind of keeping it more small and nimble. Is that something that you feel like you kind of came to terms with sort of later on? Was that something you were always thinking of? I'm curious because like I think looking back, like had you done anything different, like knowing what you know now, would you have done anything different in the early days of the studio?
Uh, I mean, as far as the business side, like I remember, you know, going to school, studying audio engineering, and thinking I never
Mm-hmm.
want to freelance or work for myself. That sounds terrifying. And then it was just sort of, I just became like a little bit more comfortable, a little with things, you know, as it went. When we, oh, okay, I guess I can like pay my bills and people will work with us, and oh, I guess I can like hire somebody
Mm-hmm.
occasionally, and oh, I guess I
Mm-hmm.
can. Um, so, sorry, I'm kind of losing track of the question.
No, no, it was just like knowing what you know now. Looking back, what would you have done anything differently as you were growing your studio?
Oh yeah, I don't think I would have done anything really differently from like a business development perspective. Like, I mean, I think there's things if I wanted to like be more aggressive or whatever, I could have, but I don't know. I feel like I've been happy with how things have gone. Um, I think if looking back, just kind of lessons in general as like a
Mm-hmm.
as a designer,
Mm-hmm.
I I wish that I put more emphasis on just like thoughtfulness and like slowed down, was like just more self-reflective about the work. Because I think early on I felt like, oh, I got to get stuff out the door really fast. I want to get things to people, like, oh, this seems good, I'll send it off, where now I place a lot more value on thinking about something a little bit longer, uh, you know, looking back on looking at what reviewing like what I'm going to send off to somebody,
Right.
and like just making sure it's really like clean and organized, and that there's not some dumb little mistake in there or whatever.
No,
Because
that's
I
really
think
good.
early it was like, I think an asset that I had was that I didn't get bogged down by little details that the client didn't care about. Because I think that's a really important skill when you're working, in the commercial sector, where things are moving really quickly. And honestly, it's like, it just doesn't need to be like the greatest piece of artwork ever made. It's a commercial for, I don't know, whatever it is.
Yeah, right.
Which isn't to say that you don't want to do high quality work, but it's like not getting into these like nitpicky little details that like your director might not care about.
Yeah, right.
But then I think that I had a tendency to like not be really careful that when I'm like communicating and delivering files to my client, that everything's very neat, and I'm like explaining things, and that I didn't miss a detail that, they said, and those kind of things.
No, that's really interesting, because I think like, especially when you're busy and you feel like you have a ton on your plate, right? It's like, okay, cool. Would they really notice this? Would they really notice this visual? Should I do a little bit more here? Is this okay? And, I think we're all guilty of doing some of that stuff to a certain degree. But I think the stuff, and it's kind of a reminder, the reason people are choosing Dash, or the reason people are choosing Sonos Sanctus, is because of the quality, right? It's because of that differentiating quality. And so as soon as you start to get into this mindset of like, well, that'll be okay, right? It's like you're already starting to pull away from why people want to come to you in the first place. And I've definitely gone through that same approach as well, where it's like, this should be fine. I think it's okay. But then like always remembering to like continue to push it, right? Like even like just doing the best you can on everything you can. What could you do a little bit extra to make this better, And like, it's tough, particularly when you've been working on a project for a while, or you're trying to get it finished. Like, to me, that's where stuff can like really feel like it can slip, where you're like, well, you don't like my original design. You've, bastardized it enough. And like, now what is it? Now this is your design. So you want it that way, fine, it's done. But still like giving yourself the pause and be like, no, okay, what can we do to make this direction, which wasn't really my original direction, better, right? What can we do to like kind of add a little bit of something to it? And I think you're right. Like, the mindset of that early on in my career versus now is definitely a little bit sharper. I think I'm paying attention to those things.
Yeah, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, I think it's been more of a realignment of how I think of what makes good creative. So like, I think I used to think that, I don't know, I'm having a hard time like explain it, but yeah, just like in general, just being more like strategic and thoughtful and slowing down, and focusing on the things like just like communication and details and things that are less sexy or exciting or interesting.
So on the building on the detail side, so this is a good question, because I feel like this is something that, as motion designers always struggle with, particularly on like the business side with clients, is how best to describe music and sound design to our clients, right? Like, when you're thinking about like things that motion designers should be using to try to get the clients to weigh in on music and stuff, so that it's giving you a little bit more direction, versus like, oh, we want to make this happier. Can you make this sound happier, Wes? And like, I don't know, do you have any advice you could tell them, like, how you would like people to describe, like when you're trying to get questions answered for you on the direction for music? Like, what are some of the things that like you try to ask the client to get them to describe the direction that they want for music and sound design?
Yeah, so in general, what I am looking for when I'm working with a director is trying to understand what they're trying to accomplish, and then helping to articulate how sound and music could accomplish that goal. Because it's difficult when a client says, oh, we want the music like this. Okay, well, why do you want the music like that? Even if because then once I understand what it is about that, then I kind of know what's in my toolbox, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also know what about a reference or an idea to keep, and then what is sort of extraneous, it doesn't need to
Mm-hmm.
be in there. And then I think then the next part is really for me to and this kind of gets back to what I was trying to say earlier, to
Mm-hmm.
really invest the time in communicating and articulating a strategy for moving forward. Um, so a lot of times I'll have like a direction, and then I'll put together kind of a deck. Like, we don't really do pretty decks like you all, because we are not visually inclined.
Sure. Right.
But I'll use like a Dropbox paper, and I'll spend time going through my library, pulling tracks and making notes about, here's why I think this might be good. Here's what maybe is the problem with it. Um, and sometimes, I'm doing that for like 7 pieces of music, and like that takes a
Wow.
little while. And then,
Yeah.
another thing is, depending on the spot, if it has a really particular arc, and let's say they want to use a piece from our library, but there's a specific arc that I know that hitting all the parts of the story are super important. So even if we had like a track that was good for part of it,
Mm-hmm.
if it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't do like part of it, then that's the problem we'd have to solve. And so
Mm-hmm.
taking the time to edit the music, to like mock it up and show them what it would feel like,
Mm-hmm.
too, is really helpful. Um,
Interesting. Do
so
you feel like? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
no, I mean, I guess so. What I'm saying is, from like a director's perspective, I think the more you can communicate what you're trying to accomplish, the more you're going to empower your sound designer or your composer to have the ideas that are going to like accomplish that goal.
Interesting. I really like when I get on phone calls with clients to get them to use like adjectives to describe how they feel about a piece, right? Because that can be really descriptive. If someone's like, "Oh yeah, it's playful," or bubbly, versus aggressive, and stuff like that. I mean, you're just going to get a different style for everything, from visuals to music and things like that. And so I tend to like to ask questions like that, as opposed to, this is the other question I had for you, is do you like it when groups like, we'll say Dash, share like references with the client, like, hey, what sort of styles are you leaning to? Do you like sort of these things? Does that begin to pigeonhole you then, because the client has now heard a reference piece that is kind of like stuck in their head as something that they want? Like, do you like coming into projects like that where a client has heard a reference piece and they're like, okay, this is the direction I like? Or does it pigeonhole them too much in that direction so that it limits your flexibility and creativity later on?
I think references are really helpful starting out,
Mm-hmm.
because they kind of can help you to put language to things.
Mm-hmm.
And like you're saying, it's like, try to think of this. Why do you like this song? Oh, well, I like that it's aggressive, and like
Mm-hmm.
what we're trying to communicate with this spot is that this is a really aggressive energy bar or whatever. you know.
Right.
And so then that sort of you gain lessons from it. I think the problem with references is when there's a reference that the client has lived with for the entire process, and then you get towards the end and you try to
Mm.
change it. That's where
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard. Um,
Mm.
I also think it can be helpful to find references that are in that client's branded materials. Like
Oh,
if
interesting.
it's
Like a video they've done previously or something.
yeah. So like I recently was working on a video, and the client said something, oh, can we have it more percussive? And it's like, well, that's very broad. Um, and so I was like, well, okay, I want to like understand what they mean by that. Like, could they share some examples of other commercials that are percussive? And I think when they said percussive, it was sort of like they were saying, like, our brand is like
Yeah.
uses music like this or something.
Sure.
So it
Right.
made
Right.
sense
Right.
for me to ask, like, hey, can you pull some other examples? And it was really helpful, because then I got 3 different spots. The music was different in them. It was all different music. There was
Mm-hmm.
a fair amount of differences, but I could totally understand what they meant by percussive. Like, they
Mm.
wanted like kind of an Afro-Cuban Latin percussion, kind of
Mm.
vibe.
Yeah.
And it was super helpful, and it made perfect sense. It was like, yes, that is exactly what's going to fit this spot, and it's going to make it fit with the rest of your branded stuff. And where at first I think I just had one reference, and it was kind of like, oh, okay, well, this sort of puts me in a box. But then I
Yeah.
got a
Right.
couple more references, and I found the common threads there, and I was able to do something that is more in my wheelhouse, because the first track was not totally like, I could have done it, but it wasn't totally in my wheelhouse.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
then seeing that more references, going, okay, I'm going to move it a little bit more into like a hip hop
Oh,
production
cool.
direction, because that's
Yeah.
what I'm better at.
and also like the percussive, like out of context, you're like, what the hell do they mean? And then like, it's just like the client being able to provide more details and like, well, here's some references. It feels percussive, and then you're like, oh, okay, that makes a lot more sense.
And I think that's like what my job is, like first and foremost. And this
Mm-hmm.
also I think kind of goes back to what I'm saying about, or trying to say about what I wish I had done differently.
Sure.
It's just realizing that how valuable that is to a client,
Yeah.
that your job is there to like try to work through these things,
Right. You're not just there
not
to
just
like
be like, oh my gosh, impressive.
right, or just to execute on stuff, and it's like, you tell me what to do, right? What do you want? It's like you're there to kind of be their partner and kind of figuring stuff out.
Yeah.
That's smart. So I know with our projects, on most of the time that we're working with you, typically, not always, but typically you're kind of coming in towards the tail end of stuff, just by the way our process has kind of been set up, and with some of our clients, just the way it is. Do you feel like your favorite projects over the years and the ones that have turned out the best, where does sound come in? Like, if you were to give advice to me and Dash and the rest of other studios out there, motion designers, when they're thinking about incorporating sound into what they're working on, when do you first want to have that conversation about like what to be working on?
Yeah, well, I mean, actually, what I do appreciate about Dash is you all tend to reach out before the project started. You know,
yeah,
like you,
yeah, that's true.
well, you do, but like even though oftentimes the work does tend to happen towards the end of the project, like you're
Mhm.
saying, but it's great to like have that heads up, because then we kind of can check and see, okay, like where is it appropriate for sound to start on this project?
Mhm.
Because there are some projects where it's really ideal to really just do it at the very end.
Right.
Otherwise, you're dragging your sound team through like reconforms and stuff, when like if it's pretty straightforward, like you just, yeah, this thing would sound nice if it had a few little sound effects to it,
Sure.
then that's great to
Sure.
do at the very end. But it's nice to identify those projects early, where it's like, oh, the music is going to be really important to your
Mm.
edit, because you want
Hmm.
something that's very rhythmic. Um, or like, oh, the sound design is going to be pretty complex. We should definitely try to get a demo in front of your client so they understand what it's going to sound like at the end.
Oh, that's really true. I didn't even think about that. Like well, and it just kind of highlights it as a case by case basis, right? But so the important thing is to know who you're going to work with for sound and music sooner than later, and let them know so that they can, to your point, decide like, well, actually, y'all probably don't need me till the end of this, or conversely, like, actually, we should hop on the call to the client to define what the sound is going to be or whatever that looks like. So that's really good to know. All
Yeah,
right, let's
and that way
see.
it's nice to know that you've got your budget figured out
Oh
sooner
yeah.
than later. It's like, look at, people will reach out at the end of a project. It's understandable. It's like production of things is so complicated. There's so many unknowns, but it's like it's hard when it's sort of like, okay, well, this is what we have budgeted. Like,
Oh yeah,
you
that's
know,
tough. Oh, and then I hate all those conversations too, because it's like, there's those moments where I realize that like I didn't budget something right either. Like, oh shit, I was assuming we just needed this, and then it's like, oh crap, we actually have this whole other layer to it. But that's a conversation for another day, talking about producing. But all right, so here's one for you, Wes. Like, you've been doing this a long time now. You've gone through a lot, worked on a bunch of different projects. I think there's a good mixture of our audience who is freelancers or considering starting their studio or doing their own thing. I'm always curious, like, what type of advice you could offer for someone that was like, starting their own, audio shop, or sound design studio, or whatever it may be. Like, what would be some advice you might give them?
sure. So I think the big one, especially if you're only a sound designer and you're not doing music, but really for both, is that
Mm-hmm.
you are going to need to have a lot of clients.
Mm-hmm.
One project is going to be a few days of work,
Wow.
maybe it would be one day of work. And so it really, it takes some time to reach that critical mass, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would just like encourage people to be prepared for that. um,
Interesting.
the other advice is, if you are a composer, like make your own music library and keep it organized.
Hmm.
um, as much as you can, like be writing music to have on hand, that either you can license it as is or you can customize it. um, we do like a fair amount of business actually that's just like the library music, and it's this great thing, because it's like the bigger our it all kind of feeds into itself with our company, because it's like somebody will come to us for sound design and we say, oh, do you
Mhm.
need music? Like here, we can actually, we'll pitch options for them, like no charge, um, so that's an opportunity for licensing.
Mm.
Or somebody comes to us for music and we go, oh, do you also want sound design for this? And so
Nice.
it's sort of this tool that we can use to win more work. And then it makes projects just go a lot more smoothly. Like there's certain types of projects where we have a lot of music in our catalog that can fit for that. And
Nice.
so having somebody come to us and we put together a big pitch of options, like I said, and we like explain
Yeah.
why we think things will work, why they wouldn't. A lot of times there's something in there that's going to work, or I have all of the experience and the project files and stuff to do something that's similar but different. And then it's just like it's just practice,
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
by if you're trying to figure out what music you want to make for your library and figure out kind of what your sound is and everything, just making a lot of music and being critical of it
Mm.
in the context of library music, that like, and I guess this goes back, towards end too, about like not focusing too much on the little details of like figuring out the big picture things that
Mhm.
would make this work for somebody, and not worrying about these fine little microscopic details
Hmm.
that aren't going to make that difference.
Focus on the big picture initially, and then with time coming back to the details.
Yeah, because I feel like library music, especially, it needs to be sort of unspecific, right? Because it's got to
Yeah.
work in a variety of contexts. So it teaches you the kind of framework that you should be building your projects on.
Hmm.
And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's something that I'm just going to keep saying, going back to that point earlier, that I feel like I'd never explained well, uh, that I wasn't as thoughtful on the early side of the project. So I would be like, I would make a track, but like the foundation wasn't right, the bones weren't right for it.
Mm.
Where now I've learned a lot better to like figure out that foundation, and then I can worry about the details and things, as we get later in the project.
No, that's great, Wes. And something I didn't think about was like the importance of organization for something you do. I mean, everyone needs to be organized, but when you're working on libraries of tracks and like trying to remember what track would be a good fit, I mean, I know y'all have made so many tracks to like be able to go back and find that in an organized way. I imagine that's a whole like job of its own on how to keep those like up to date and organized.
Well, yeah. So I would say I would encourage people to keep a spreadsheet with everything and like tag sounds and whatnot. But I will say I never use it for searching for tracks.
Keep a
I mean,
spreadsheet, and you can
it's
sit there
not true.
dormant and shake your head when you haven't used it years later.
Occasionally I will, if it's like something specific. But at this point, it's like I've pitched from the library so much that I just go through it really, really fast and grab stuff that way. But I will
That's
say
good.
we've got a new library on our new website that's going to be like searchable and everything. And so it was really
Ooh,
great to have all that metadata ready to go. Um,
to have it like prepped more or less for it.
yeah, exactly. Like if I was starting from scratch, it would have been a nightmare.
That's great. That's great. Well, we got about 10 minutes left here. We put up on our Instagram poll just to see if anyone had some questions. So I got a few here. Would also encourage anyone listening. This is interactive. You all are welcome to come up here and ask Wes a question if you want to raise your hand and you have something that we've been talking about that sounds interesting, or you'd like to ask Wes some thoughts on running a studio. While people are debating if they want to ask a question or not, I got a couple here. I like to ask this one. It's like the Reddit question, but would you rather fight one horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses? Really get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, so that's a question that is very contextual.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
What is the arena battlefield?
This is true. This is true. Because if it was, let's just say it's like a coliseum for just the purposes.
Okay, so I
Because you
can't
said
run away.
arena, can't run
Okay, I
away. You're in a
can't run.
coliseum. Yeah.
Can't run. Nowhere to go.
Mm-hmm.
Can I have really good stomping boots?
Yeah, man. You can wear whatever boots you want to in this
Okay, then
scenario.
I would do the duck-sized horses,
The
because I
duck
feel
size
like I'd
horses, yeah.
have better luck just kind of kicking them than
Than trying to
with
run.
something giant. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like getting eaten by a duck wouldn't be a pro.
I
Good
hopefully
answer.
will never be in either situation.
Yeah, I was about to say that life
Bad
is in
news.
a very precarious place if that's the result of where we are. All right, so here's one from our Instagram poll. People want to know what the meaning of your name. Why Sono Sanctus? Where does that come from? What's the meaning of the name and choosing it?
Yeah, so it means like sacred sound. And so the
Hmm.
the reason I chose it, because when I was starting out, before I did the kind of work I'm doing now, I worked at a church for a long time, and so I had these kind of skills and in church audio stuff. And so when I started the company, I hedged my bets and was consulting at churches and kind of helping them like use their sound systems better. Because usually what would happen is churches would just like hire an incredibly expensive company to just put in a totally new system. So that was part of the work I was doing. So I wanted a name that kind of could work either way. But I will say that we, as part of the new website, we got a new rebrand coming up, and we are rebranding to just Sanctus.
Just Sanctus, no Sono.
Yep. Yeah, we're dropping the sound part because we get called Sonos a lot, and Sonos was not very popular 10 years ago.
Yeah, right.
And it's just a mouthful.
No, I don't blame you. Sanctus, that's really cool. That's great. Well, I'm excited to see the new branding. You have to give a plug. What's your website for people to go check it out?
Well, it's sonosanctus.com right now.
Okay.
It will be sanctus.audio soon.
Sanctus.audio. Nice. I'm excited to check it out. Let's see. Okay. So here's someone asked, definition of what a sound designer actually does for the uninformed. So
that's a really good question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm trying to think of the best way to answer this. So sure. in film, a sound designer, like I'm talking like Hollywood film or like television, a sound designer is more specific than what I am when I call myself a sound designer. So in film, there's more roles because there's more to do. So there is a Foley artist, which you've probably heard of and seen videos of. That's when you see like somebody, walking, trying to match the footsteps of something.
Right.
Foley
Coconuts for the horse.
Yeah. Coconut. That's Foley is all the performed sounds that somebody is like watching the picture and recording it. A sound designer is kind of basically like the other sounds. So like if a car passes by, that's the sound designer. If a spaceship lands, that's the sound designer. We do some Foley, but we just call it all sound design because it'd be silly to be like, oh, I did Foley on this thing. And it's like, you did like 3 footsteps.
That's great. I didn't even realize that. That's a really good definition of it.
And then, so another distinction is we always make the distinction between sound design and mix.
Okay.
Even though as far as motion designer is concerned, they're kind of the same thing. So when I say sound design, it's like creating all of the sound effects, but mixing is making sure that the volume of everything is balanced so that the music and each sound and the voice are all sitting together really nicely.
Oh, I see. That's great. I guess I didn't realize all the complexity. So you basically there's the Foley artist, and then all the other sounds outside the Foley artist is essentially what sound design would be from like a motion picture standpoint.
Yeah. Well, and then motion picture, you'd have like a dialogue editor.
Oh, right.
Too. Oh, wow. But I mean, it's like how motion graphics, right? Like you all are like graphic designers. Typesetters and animators and, colorists a lot of times. So.
100%. We would just confuse clients if we started to go into that level of detail. So it totally makes sense.
I think that a good important distinction is drawing the lines between sound design and music, because that does happen sometimes, and I always feel badly when someone hires us to do sound design and they're like, so when are we getting the music? I'm like, oh no.
Oh no. Oh no.
It doesn't happen often because we're like, I think we really communicate that clearly, but sometimes someone will ask us only for sound design, and we ask specifically on our checklist if they also want music. Anyway.
Yeah, it's like you've learned from like previous projects that is a very quick question to ask.
Because it's confusing, it's like
for sure.
it's there's so many details, for somebody who's doing an animation in a piece that we don't want those kind of things to slip through the cracks. Anyway, so music is like a song. Like if something could like play on its own and work without context, I'd usually call that music. But then we end up getting into this kind of weird gray area where sound design is like doing musical things a lot of times. So like I would call it a sound effect, but it has like a musical tone that fits with the music track.
Yeah, right.
And that is sort of a gray area that I think of the music as like you could listen to it on its own and it sounds like it makes sense. Where even if a sound effect is musical, and maybe it's like even a musical instrument, if it's just a little like flourish right here, then I would think of that as the sound design.
No, that's great. Okay. All right. Let's see. Maybe one more here. Anyone from the audience have a question? If not, I got one more on the sheet I can read. Let's see. No one. A bunch of listeners today. That's all right. I'm glad you all are here. All right. So here's the last one for you, Wes. Someone asked, has the growth of Spotify or any other large music streaming platform affected your work at all? Or maybe, I guess, when they mean large streaming platform, like, I don't know, any of these other services that you could buy music from potentially as well. Like, have you guys noticed any sort of shift in, like, with just the amount of Spotify, growth of Spotify or anything like that? That's great. Hmm. Right. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I believe it. It's like made the everyday person who enjoys music their life fantastic. For people who are trying to get out there and get discovered, it's a little bit harder. So, no, good stuff. Well, Wes, can't thank you enough for joining us. A little bit of some closing here. If you all are interested in seeing more of Sonos Sanctus, definitely check out their website at sonosanctus.com. That's SONOSANCTUS.com. And then it'll eventually be sanctus.audio, I think you said, here shortly as well. Just a reminder, this is a weekly thing we do, Mograph Lunch. Traditionally, we started off the series doing news, portfolio projects, and then general industry topics. Over the last few weeks, we've been doing more on studio interviews, how we built this kind of edition, how you built the studio. Had some good folks on here as well. We're looking for more women-owned studios and POC-owned studios as well. So we are paying attention to make sure that we get more than just some white guys on here talking about owning studios. So we have a list of people that are coming up, as well as our Tuesday takeovers. So the folks who have been following the Dash Bash, we've been interviewing a variety of different freelancers whose blog posts are up on the Dash Bash website. And then, of course, I have to make a plug for the Dash Bash itself, which is going to be going on September 23rd and 24th of this year. Tickets are going on sale at the end of this month. More details are coming out on all that here really soon. Can't wait to be hanging with you all. I know in North Carolina, we have over 50% of our county has been vaccinated at this point, so we're feeling really good about an in-person event this September. There is a possibility that some of it can be online, but there's no guarantees of that yet. We're still working through the details. But anyway, all that's still to come. Join us next week, 1 p.m. Eastern time, where we'll be doing this again. Thanks so much for joining us, Wes. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you all soon. Have a great weekend.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.